They say the only constant is change. Heraclitus said that. And today, well, we're diving deep into a change that feels pretty fundamental. It's reshaping how global finance even works. Welcome to the deep dive. So if you're keeping tabs on global current affairs, maybe you're prepping for exams like the UPSC, or maybe you're just really curious about the big economic shifts happening.
Yeah.
Well, this deep dive is definitely for you.
Yeah, it is.
We're tackling a big one today. De-dollarization.
Yeah.
It's making waves everywhere, and our main source material is this really interesting article from Current Tribune called The Great Global Dedollarization.
Right, and I mean, boiling it down, what this source really gets into is this deliberate and seemingly accelerating effort. Lots of countries are involved, and they're trying to, use the U.S. dollar less in their international trade and their financial dealings. It's a pretty direct challenge, really, to the dollar's long-standing position.
Decades long, yeah. So our mission here is to really unpack what this Coin Tribune article tells us. We want to get a handle on what's driving this, what steps are actually being taken, and maybe most importantly, what it all might mean for the global economy down the road.
Let's do it.
Let's dive in.
Yeah.
So first off, the scale the article mentions, it kicks off with a really striking number.
Yeah.
It says over 90 countries are starting to move away from the dollar in trade.
Yeah.
I mean, 90 countries. That alone tells you this isn't just some small fringe thing.
Absolutely not. It suggests something much bigger, like a strategic pivot happening globally. And the source really emphasizes the driver behind this isn't just like finding a cheaper way to do things.
Right.
It frames it more as a desire for, well, economic sovereignty, a way to challenge the dollar's dominance and maybe realign how global money power works.
And Coin Tribune points fingers specifically at the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus their newer members are the ones really spearheading this. It says their strategy got much more intense starting early 2025.
And they're not just talking, are they? The article gives some pretty solid examples of things already happening, like Iran and Russia.
What about them?
Well, the source quotes Iran's central bank governor, Mohammad Reza Farzin. He apparently said they've completely eliminated the U.S. dollar in their trade with each other.
Completely, wow.
Yeah, now it's all rubles and rolls between them. That's bypassing the dollar entirely.
It's a total switch, just direct currency swaps.
Yeah.
And what about trade growth? Did the article touch on that?
It did. It mentioned India and Russia specifically. Their trade apparently jumped quite a bit from around $13 billion up to $27 billion.
That's a big jump.
It is. And the source ties that growth in large part to them using the rupee for payments. It just made trading easier between them, without needing dollars.
So using local currencies can actually boost trade. Interesting.
The source also mentioned Brazil and China, didn't it? That's right. They've set up direct exchanges between the Brazilian real and the Chinese yuan. And crucially, the article notes, this is backed up by integrating China's payment system into Brazilian banks.
So making it practical.
Exactly. Makes those direct real yuan transactions actually work smoothly on the ground. These aren't just one-offs, The source paints them as very deliberate steps.
Yeah.
It really hammers home that this strategy is getting baked into actual international deals, building out the plumbing needed to make it work.
Okay, so we see these big players, BRICS, making bilateral moves. But what about the infrastructure? How are they building the capacity for this larger shift? The article talks about alternative systems.
Yes, exactly. This is where it gets more systemic, right? The source talks about mechanisms designed specifically to, go around the dollar and the existing, mostly Western-led financial setup. BRICS Pay is a big one mentioned.
BRICS Pay, tell me more.
According to the article, it's a payment system for cross-border stuff, meant to use local currencies between members and partner countries. The source says it already lets over 50 partner countries basically bypass SWIFT.
Bypassing SWIFT.
Yeah.
That's the big global messaging network for banks, right?
That's the one. Historically central to how dollar transactions work globally. So sidestepping SWIFT is a major step towards, independent payment channels.
Seems like a direct shot at perceived weak spots or maybe control points in the dollar system.
It certainly seems that way. And the source also looks at regional efforts, like the Commonwealth of Independent States, the CIS countries like Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan.
Right.
The article states that this group now does a huge chunk, 85% of its cross-border deals using their own national currencies.
85%. That's massive for a regional bloc.
It really is. And it shows this isn't just BRICS, right? It's a wider trend in different parts of the world. The source also brings up the New Development Bank, the NDB.
Often called the BRICS Bank.
Yeah, kind of seen as their alternative to the World Bank or IMF. The article says the NDB is specifically funding infrastructure projects using local currencies. Now, it mentions examples in Brazilian real and, interestingly, Russian USD.
USD. That seems odd in this context.
It does seem a bit counterintuitive, I agree. But the article's overall point is that the NDB's intent is clearly to push financing outside the dollar framework whenever they can.
Okay. And speaking of Russia, the article links their experience, especially since the sanctions related to the Ukraine conflict, as a big catalyst here.
Absolutely. The source points to a really dramatic shift. Since those sanctions came in, the share of Russian exports paid for in rubles has apparently jumped from just 10% to over 40%.
Wow, from 10 to over 40.
Yeah. It kind of suggests that external pressures, like sanctions, can sometimes backfire and actually speed up the very de-dollarization they might be aimed at stopping, as countries look for ways to be more resilient.
So BRICS might be leading, but the Coin Tribune article is pretty clear. This is spreading out. It's not contained.
Definitely not contained. The article gives examples, like in Africa, it mentions Tanzania banning the dollar for some types of transactions. And the source suggests this might nudge neighbors like Kenya or Nigeria to think about similar moves for their own currencies.
And Southeast Asia, too. I think I saw that mentioned.
You did. ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, they're apparently actively pushing regional ways to settle trade using local currencies among themselves. So that points to a coordinated effort within that region, too, trying to lessen dollar dependence.
And then there's the energy sector. That's always been super dollar heavy, especially oil, right? The article highlights that.
Yeah, this is a potentially huge area the source points to, some really significant shifts mentioned, like Saudi Arabia now linked with BRICS, apparently accepting Chinese yuan for some oil sales.
Yuan for oil from Saudi Arabia, that's big.
It is. And India paying for Russian oil in rupees, totally avoiding the dollar there in major energy deals. And Ghana's even using gold, actual gold, to pay for crude imports, according to the article.
Cool.
Yeah. These are pretty major developments in a sector that's traditionally been, anchored to the dollar. It suggests the system for paying for global energy might be starting to fragment. Now, the Coin Tribune article tries to interpret why this is happening, especially from countries like Russia. It suggests it's seen as a reaction to the dollar being used, well, politically. It even includes a quote attributed to Vladimir Putin.
What does it quote him saying?
The quote in the sources, "The dollar is used as a weapon. We really see that this is the case. It is a serious mistake." So the article presents this view as a key reason behind this push for alternatives. And just to be clear, we're reporting what the source says here, not endorsing the view.
Understood. Presenting the perspective cited in the article. So that's one side's reported motivation. What about the reaction from the U.S.? Does the Coin Tribune article cover that?
It does touch on that. The source notes that the U.S. response, being the issuer of the dollar, has been, well, pretty strong when faced with this de-dollarization trend. It specifically mentions a reaction attributed to Donald Trump.
Okay, what was that?
It states he threatened 100% tariffs on countries that were actively setting up these alternative monetary systems.
100% tariffs. That's
Yes.
extremely high. Did the article say if those kinds of threats had any noticeable political impact?
It suggests they did. The source reports these threats seem to have caused some ripples. For instance, it mentions Brazil's President Lula. While he's still pushing for multilateralism generally, the article says he apparently took the idea of a common BRICS currency off the table for Brazil's BRICS presidency this year.
Interesting timing.
Yeah. And the article includes a quote from Lula emphasizing cooperation, something like, "Resorting to unilateralism undermines the international order. A coherent defense of multilateralism is the only path forward." Again, just relaying the source's content here. But it shows that leaders are doing this delicate balancing act,
It really highlights that interplay, doesn't it? Economic moves provoke political responses, which then circle back and affect the economic path itself. So if we pull all this together from the Coin Tribune piece, the big picture seems to be one of, well, real momentum. It's sustained.
Exactly. The article doesn't frame this as just a temporary protest. It calls it a global strategic pivot. And the evidence it points to is all these different initiatives, trade deals, payment systems, bank policies, all aimed at consciously reducing reliance on the dollar.
Which naturally leads us to the big question. What does it all mean? What's the significance looking ahead?
Right. The source pushes us to think beyond just less dollar use. It raises these really fundamental questions about where this all ends up, this whole monetary transformation. What's the long-term result? Is it going to lead to, a genuine lasting shift in global economic power, maybe multiple currencies playing major roles? Or, as the source also floats, could it mainly just end up reinforcing the kind of geopolitical fragmentation we're already seeing around the world? Those are the huge uncertainties the article leaves hanging.
And that really underscores why understanding the details, the drivers, the mechanisms behind this de-dollarization push, as laid out in the Contribune article, is so important right now. For you listening, whether you're studying for the UPSC and need to get your head around these complex global economic forces, or you're just trying to make sense of the world today, this deep dive hopefully gives you some essential context. It really helps shed light on the forces shaping trade, finance, international relations as we speak. So thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Great Global Dedollarization, looking specifically through the lens of the Contribune article.
Yeah, it's clearly a very complex situation. It's still unfolding, and the consequences, well, they could be pretty significant. We'll have to keep watching.
We will indeed. And as the article prompts us to think about, that critical question really lingers. Will this huge shift in money ultimately rebalance global economic power? Or will it mostly just deepen the geopolitical cracks that are already there? Definitely something to keep thinking about as you follow world events. Understanding these dynamics is, as we said, especially crucial for anyone tracking major global economic changes, whether for exams like UPSC or just for staying informed. If you found this deep dive valuable, maybe learned something new from our look at the Corn and Tribune piece, please do give us a like. Consider subscribing to the deep dive for more explorations like this, and definitely leave your questions or thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. That's all for this deep dive.